This is a story about a land that followed the most wise and wonderful king that ever was or ever will be. This king was loved and adored by his subjects, as he also loved and adored them. In this land, the people were happy and content to live according to the king's commands. For many, many years, the people knew that they were blessed when the crops gave an increase. The king had also told them that as a reward for loving and obeying him, they would have children. It was a common thing that when a man and a maid married, sooner or later children would come along. This was a fact of the kingdom. In the land, it was looked upon with great joy when a family had many children seated around its dinner table. For many generations, it was the king of all who decided how many children each family would have. And, however many that was, they received each child with abundant joy and trained him up to follow the king. One day, a strange little man appeared in the village. He had wild, bushy hair and wore strange, flowing robes. He definitely had come from one of the foreigners' villages. He found a vacant cottage and quickly opened up a shop. The title on the wooden front door read, "Alchemist, for women only." Now, no one in the land knew what an alchemist was. They had no idea what it was that the newcomer was selling. Was it some type of material? A new type of bread grain? Maybe it was some type of doctor. Many questions went throughout the land in regard as to whom this mysterious stranger was. Finally, a tiny woman named Sarah decided to go into the shop and talk to the man. She cautiously opened the door and slowly went inside. The walls of the shop were lined with many bottles of different sizes, shapes, and colors. At the wooden counter, straight in front of her, was the stranger. He seemed to be unaware of her, as he was mixing the contents of different bottles together. The little man quickly looked up at her. "Oh, hello, I didn't notice you had come in. May I help you?" Yes, sir. I was just wondering if you could tell me what an alchemist is. You see, no one seems to know what you're selling," Sarah said nervously. "Why, an alchemist is a practitioner of alchemy," he stated, in a tone that made her feel as if she should have known. "Come over here and I'll show you something I've just invented." Sarah walked over to the counter. "To change your hair to the color of your choice, that's this little bottle," he said, as he handed her a little glass vial. "This will change your hair to red, or this brown bottle will change your hair to brown. Take a pick." Sarah at first was horrified to think of changing her hair, but the idea that she could make her hair a color other than that she was born with was quite intriguing. She thanked the little man and left the shop, and so it began. Soon, many more of the women went into the alchemist's shop. The first thing each woman asked was, "What is an alchemist?" And the stranger would always reply, "One who practices alchemy." As time passed, the alchemist gave the women many of his little bottles, the contents of which changed many things that they thought could never be changed. There were bottles to change the hair color, the eyelash color, the eyebrow color, even bottles of mixtures to change the skin color if one so desired. One day, the strange alchemist sent notices to all the women in the land that he had developed something that would change everything for their good, and that he would like to invite each and every one of them to come into his shop for a free sample of this new formula. On the appointed day, all the women poured tightly into his shop. The little man stood on a stool behind the counter so that he could be seen by all. In his right hand, he held a little silver bottle above his head for all the ladies to observe. "Ladies, I have just developed a mixture that will change your life forever. Just one drop of this formula in your morning tea, and you will be able to control for yourself when you will have babies. Just think, you will now have the freedom to do what you want to do. Taking care of children all day is such a waste of time. Now you can do something important. You can find yourself, your hidden talents. No more slaving around in a dingy cottage all day. You can be free from the burden of children and household chores and go out and do what you feel like doing. Concentrate on yourselves for a while instead of tending to others." The alchemist handed every woman a little silver bottle. It had never occurred to the women that one could decide for themselves when to have children. From generation to generation, it had always been the will of the king. It also had never occurred to them before that they had burdens. But then, maybe this little stranger was right. If they could stop having children, then they could go and do whatever they wanted to do. So, secretly, many of the women went to their homes and started putting a drop of the stranger's mixture into their tea. To their surprise, no more children came along. Time went by, and all the women that had taken the stranger's formula never had another child. Attitudes began to change from the moment the little alchemist came to town. The women of the land were much more concerned with how they looked, what they wore, what color their hair was, than with taking care of their husbands and children. They began to go out of their homes, leaving their children with the old-fashioned women who were still having children and staying at home. Many of these women started businesses and soon were competing with their own husbands, who were lawfully, by decree of the king, head of their families. It seemed to these poor husbands that they were now fighting their own wives for their king-given positions in their homes. Then something happened. Sarah, the first of the women who had gone to the alchemist, sat down wearily one day after having just come home from a hard day at work. Her only little girl had just returned home, as she did every day, from Mrs. Sweet's, the neighbor down the street, who took care of her as Sarah worked. "Mother," her little girl queried, "would it be okay if I called Mrs. Sweet Mummy?" Sarah looked at her daughter in shock. "Why would you want to call Mrs. Sweet Mummy?" "Well, Mrs. Sweet said that the king looks upon children as a good thing to have. She says that children are one way he has of showing favor to his loyal subjects. I know Mrs. Sweet loves to take care of me, and I see her much more than you, so I thought maybe I should call her Mummy." The little girl said with her head hanging low and her bottom lip quivering. At that moment, something happened inside Sarah's heart. Her heart, which had been growing cold, dark, and self-centered from the alchemist's little bottles, suddenly softened, and immediately she knew the lie that she had believed. She had been deceived. Sarah decided that it was time to talk with her king and, after bidding her family goodbye, made the journey to his castle. The king immediately gave her audience, and Sarah poured out the whole sad story. The king shook his head in sorrow and said, Sarah, it grieves me that something that should have been considered as wonderful and a gift has been turned into a curse and a burden. This happens in the heart when self becomes too important. To be happy is to give of yourself. As women, you always had true contentment when you were giving of yourselves to your children and husbands. This is what will make you satisfied. I have made you this way. You have been searching for happiness in a self-centered way, and you will never reach it. You may have many treasures that gold can buy, but you will never reach your goal of true contentment. The king looked solemnly at Sarah. Go home, Sarah. Throw your little silver bottle away. Go home. Sarah bowed low before her king. As she went to leave, she remembered something and turned to ask, Your Majesty, do you know what an alchemist is? The king nodded. An alchemist is one who takes liberty in changing something from one form or nature to another. Sarah pondered for a moment. My king, he tried to change our form, didn't he? And he almost succeeded, she stated with a shiver. Thanking her king, Sarah turned and went home. The news of Sarah's visit with the king quickly spread throughout the land. The women were so glad to hear that the king had made them so very unique. They all threw their little silver bottles away and lived on in true happiness. As for the alchemist, he went out of business